There's this story that's pertinent and local to me that's about Medgel and Mitchell's Fold Stone Circle. First of all, no, I don't think it's a true story as such. The only facts, in inverted commas, that there are really related to the local church, ironically. The Malleus Maleficorum, which was a German book, which was basically an outline of how you discover what a witch is and who is a witch. Pretty much every day I walk up to Mitchell's Fold. Stapley Common was common ground, so that meant that people could bring their cattle, their sheep, to freely graze there. The story itself is about a witch who milks a fairy cow dry. The Reverend Muldergrave Brewster, who was sort of a Victorian vicar, he actually was also a great folklorist and went out and collected stories. Always had this sense of, I'm putting my feet in her footsteps. The fold would have been somewhere that you would bring your cattle or sheep for protection. They're starving, and the fairies look kindly upon the villagers. You can see the parched land. It would be a very, very difficult place to get food. You had the demonology, which King James I had written, who'd got a real hang-up about witches and witchcraft. This wonderful fairy cow appears on Stapley Common. This is quite a mining community where superstition's rife. We've got the holly surrounding the village. Everybody goes there on a daily basis and can take one bucket full of milk. I think that stories very often come out of times where there is hardship. We've got the hawthorn surrounding the village, which was protectorates from this sort of thing. Provided they do that, fairy cow is happy. But then what happens is Mitchell, or Medgel, as I'm calling her, she's sort of really disgruntled by this, that the villagers are getting all this help from the fairies. It resulted in him creating these carvings within the church, which is very unusual to have a carving of a witch in a church. It is using this story to contemplate around the things that we now do today to people on a regular basis. Her pail has actually got a sieve at the bottom of it, so she milks and milks and milks the cow until it's dry. We've got the pin well, where pins have been found that people threw into our holy well, as it's called. The cow disappears, and so the poor people of the locality feel that they're going to starve. It was not uncommon up until quite late 18th century, where women were still being called witches and persecuted for it. Rural isolation is very prevalent around here. A lot of people suffer mental health issues in the farming community because we are so isolated. Witch bottles or bellamine pots have been found in thresholds around here. When the witch tries to move, she can't move, and the villagers come around and they realise what she's done, and they decide to imprison her in the stone circle. A particularly good-looking woman might turn your husband's eye. I think they lend themselves to wanting to have a story put behind them. At the height of the witch trials, a lot of women were killed unjustly just for being different in some way. Waldegrave Brewster did these carvings of Medgel. That's probably the only image that there actually is of Medgel. Bellarmine being a witch hunter, his name was synonymous with witch hunting. You can feel very lonely here as well. I think mental health and witchcraft and witch blaming also go together. It is very, very seated in this landscape. It's incredibly beautiful, but is incredibly harsh. There was a genuine fear of witches, and it's almost like that was the sort of the personification, I think, of the hardships that the community were feeling. Go back to this idea of a blame culture. The punishment outweighs the crime. They had to have something to blame, and at that time that manifested itself in the word witch. The famine ends anyway, so everybody lives. Many of the women who were called witch, they would have been hung. Somebody acting a bit strange, it's easier to say that they've been possessed by the devil than to actually sort of think, hang on a minute, this person's in trouble in terms of their mental health. So it is relevant to today. These were for protection against things like witches and evil and devils and all of those things that we perhaps don't have those names now, but have them living with us. The only way of proving your innocence was by actually dying. So the ducking stool, where they were put into water, or if they were in Scotland, they would have been burned, but they would have suffered incredible torture beforehand. Looking at a broken down cottage that's en route, people would buy these things and then throw them into the water again. They don't think, oh, well, the famine's ended, we'll go and get her out of her prison. No, she's there forevermore. Imagining that this is where somebody lived on the outskirts of society, the hardship that you would have, the fact that if you were cast out, how much more difficult that would be for you. If you floated after you died, that proved that you were innocent, but you were kind of dead after that. So it was kind of tough, whatever you did.